First of all, I wish to thank the Republic of Hungary for putting up this beautiful, interesting building and for enabling us to hold a meeting here that deals not only with the problems of Hungary, because Hungary is part of the world, so the world's problems are also the problems of Hungary, but dealing with the problems altogether. And we have seen and heard how one of the main problems nowadays is defined as sustainable development or sustainability altogether. And this is going to be the centered part of this discussion. The great American writer, humorist, Mark Twain once said, "Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it." We can say something similar. Everybody talks about sustainability, but a few people do something, but very few, too few, and they don't do enough. We are going to see what can be done still. But sustainability is a question that is not only, like the Brundtland Commission originally said, has to do with the resources for the next generations. Surely that too. But it has to do with our life on this planet. I had the pleasure to be at a meeting 5 days ago at the United Nations in New York, where one of the keynote speakers, just preceding mine, was the former president of the World Bank, James Wolferson, and he gave a series of statistics. How would the world look like in the future? And he gave the statistics, the projections to 2050. If you look at 2050, the world will have 9.6 billion people. There will be increasing pressure from the environment because there will be warming. We can extrapolate the warming trend. We can also see the effect of what would happen on the resource distribution. How would we use the resources that are available? Now, when you look at that situation in a linear extrapolation from today, by the year 2050, we would have a world that is impossible to maintain on a human level, on a level where it's 7.3 billion people now, moving up to 9.6, would live in some level of well-being, some level of fairness, equity. This is not possible because the world will be too tightly organized, too tightly set up for its resources. So the effect of this squeeze that is coming is already manifest. I don't want to be pessimistic, that's not the problem here. But let's look at the problems and then look at the possible solutions or ways beyond it. The problems are already with us. The change, the big change toward a crisis world has already begun. See what the signs are already. Very, very interesting that not only do we see these unusual weather patterns, today also, very early in June, this hot is not quite usual. And everywhere when we see the changes, which is most obvious on the climate. But we also see the pressure on people. It's not unexpected, perhaps, but unfortunate. There should be violence in the world. There should be entire groups of people who are out to kill and to gain power, not only to dominate others, but actually kill off the enemies. It's unexpected, but perhaps not so totally implausible that we should have such incidents, like a month or two ago, when a pilot of the most disciplined, best run airline in the world was all of a sudden going crazy and running his airplane into the ground, where 2 days ago, a captain in the Yangtze River disregarded the warning of a storm and launched his ship right into the middle of the storm. These are crisis phenomena. It reflected on the individual mind. Not only is there a phenomenon of a sense of total systemic change, but a sense that we are all involved in it. We are all part of this change that is already on the horizon. If we do not change, then a crisis, a major crisis, is inevitable. Then we could change, but the price would be very, very high. So it's better to look at the situation now. And the situation can be seen on various dimensions. What I'd like to show is now the most basic dimension, the resources, energy and material resources. How can we live on a planet with 7.3 billion people already moving up with sufficient energy, sufficient resources? So let's look at the very basic situation. I'm not going to give a scientific talk here, that's not the point. The point is to understand that we live on a spaceship. We live on a planet. This planet is circling the sun in our solar system and is being fed by energy from the sun. It has been said that if the sun, for any cosmic reason, would cease to shine, within a matter of weeks, all life on Earth would be ended. On the deep seas, perhaps some more months, but on Earth, there would be, on the planet itself, there will be no further life. So we need to use the solar energy. The solar energy is what is feeding the whole planet. Everything that is moving on this Earth is finally, on a thermodynamic sense, is being fed by solar energy. So we have, like a mill, like a water mill or an air mill, windmill, we have warm air coming in and cool air being radiated off. Now the difference between the hot air coming in and the cool air going out can be extracted. It is extracted by all life on Earth, first of all in the seas, and then everything is built on those lives that have started over 4 billion years ago. And more complex organisms are built as exploiting the energy differential from the hot air from the sun and the cool space temperature, 2.7 on the Kelvin scale around us. Everything is collaborating here to maintain this system. So what do we need to be able to work with this? We are a system on this planet which is open to energy and closed to matter. I'm simplifying somewhat because there is also massive particles reaching the planet, and there is some radiation moving out as well. But on the whole, what we can use is the energy that's flowing to us from the sun and the matter that is available here. Now, the flow energy is constant. It's likely to go on for billions of years. And it can be used, transformed in very different ways. The matter that is here is constant. It's here. And it doesn't go out, it doesn't come in. Other than a few meteorites reaching the Earth, and we hope they're not too big, and other than a few spaceships that may be lost in space, there's nothing coming in or out that's material. So what do we need to do? Very obviously, we need to use the inflow of energy, this flow energy from the sun, cyclic in different ways, using it such a way that it's replaceable, that it's not substitutable, but that it can be used constantly. That means we have to cycle and recycle the material resources. Consider, ladies and gentlemen, that we're on a spaceship where we have batteries loaded with energy, where we have a certain amount of material goods. Now, what is the rational thing to do? It's not rational to use the energy from the battery, because we can also pick up energy from the space around us. The whole solar system is here. It is not rational to pick up the material goods and the material resources available to us. Extract it, use it, throw it back, because those are finite. Energy flow is practically infinite. Material resources are finite. So what do we need to do? We need to use the infinite energy and recycle the finite matter. What do we do instead? We use just the contrary. we used finite sources of energy, fossil energy. Now it's changing somewhat, of course, but basically we are still using the majority energy is this fossil energy. And we are picking up these finite resources and using them and throwing them back. So we are not using the spaceship in a sustainable manner. And this is a very basic problem, and this is the problem of energy and material resources. There's much more to the whole problem, obviously, and I'll get to that in a moment. But just to keep this in mind, if we want to survive in level of well-being on a spaceship, we better use infinite sources of energy, available flow energy, and we better recycle all the material resources that we can. Otherwise, the garbage will mount and the batteries will be drained. Okay. Very obviously so. But we do not so obviously make use of this very basic information. As a result, we have a whole series of problems. We have a whole series of unsustainability problems. We have impacts on human health. We have on agriculture, on forests, on our water resources, on ecosystems, coastal areas. On the one hand, water is being used up in a very frighteningly fast rate, available fresh water. On the other hand, we are getting more and more water flooding from the seas because the sea levels are rising as the ice is melting. So we have a whole series of problems due to the mismanagement of this spaceship. This has immediate consequences on the societal level. As I mentioned, the stress phenomena today, people behaving in an irrational way, because there is a stress being felt almost everywhere in the world. Protests are rising. In this same expo at the very beginning, as it opened at the beginning of May, there were quite uncalled for and unexplainable demonstration and vandalism. This is not unusual. Almost everywhere where there's a large group of people coming together, there are always some who are using violence. And terrorism today and violence is becoming a more and more global phenomenon. The environment damages are growing more and more, and we can be more and more aware of them, whether they are man-made, accidental, or purposive, but for some reason there is more and more of these problems whereby technology has side effects, the non-intended side effects. We think to use it for something, and then it turns out at the same time there is something else is happening. We all know about the problem of heating up of the atmosphere. This is a crucial problem, and we just hope that this fall, the climate conference will take some decisive steps. But the question that is not often regarded is that you can reach critical points beyond which it's very difficult to move back. It's a critical point where these negative feedbacks that stabilize the temperature shift into positive feedbacks. So the warmer it gets, the warmer it gets next. Like the ice melts, water becomes a darker surface, absorbs more heat, melts more ice, more water, absorbs more heat. So it's a constant feedback cycle. And many such cycles are at present. So if you reach that critical point beyond which there is this rapid heat up, then it will be difficult to turn it back. Possibly could be still done, but it will take tremendous changes in the way we use energy, the way we live. They already need to be anticipated, but let's not wait until it becomes so late that it becomes very, very difficult. These some extrapolations here are made in this case by a group of physicists at Princeton who made various scenarios. But they said that if CO2 would double compared to pre-industrial levels, there would be a certain level of heating up. If it would be quadruple, 4 times what were pre-industrial levels, then it would become an irreversible process. Then you would have 8 to 12 degrees Celsius in the northern hemisphere warming. That would mean what they call it, it's a roasted world. Agriculture would practically be impossible. So we speak here at this expo about feeding the world, feeding the planet. But to feed the planet, you have to have a viable planet. You have to have energy conditions, which means also temperature conditions, which are possible, suitable for agriculture and for people to live, survive, not only to food, but also to drink, for water. Both of these effects are extremely important. So the water scarcity already, different projections. One projection says 3 billion people already living in conditions of water scarcity. So this is not something that we can ignore. We do not ignore it, but it calls for changes. If you don't change, this is an artistic projection of how Paris would look if all the saltwater planetary ice, so that all the ice over the saltwater would melt, especially in the southern hemisphere. Then you would have a sea level rise. Not only Paris would look like this, New York would look something similar. The World Trade Center would not be bombed from above, but would be standing deep in water. The new one, I mean. So this is something that impacts on everything, on everybody. Now let me get to the positive part. I've taken few minutes for your time and for your attention to talk about the prospects if we do not change. Who says that we will not change? The question is no longer whether we will change, we will change. The question is how soon and in which way. Can we avoid the major problems by timely change? Understand it. For that we need to understand the problem and also understand what is the way out beyond this. Obviously, a great deal of behavioral change, value change has to occur, but it has to occur on the basis of concepts, of thinking. There's a beautiful saying that you all know, attributed to Einstein, that has been said by many, but Einstein said it very clearly. The great problems of the world cannot be solved with the same kind of thinking in the context of which they have been born. So we need radically new thinking. And I think this is where it starts. We have to rethink our situation on this spaceship in such a way that we can manage it, we can take care of it, because we have to take care of the planet and we have to take care of people. If we don't take care, the situation would run forward as before, and then it could become too late. So we have to think about resources for a sustainable world. There's a number of conceptual changes, philosophical worldview changes have to occur. And this I'm just trying to outline. We could make a whole day's discussion on each one of these, obviously. But it means that our whole attitude toward the world has to change. As Gandhi said, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And to be the change, we have to change our mind about who we are and what the world is. So we need a new ethic, an ethic which is not only says, I'm representing my own interests, that's what is good for me is what counts, never mind what is good for others. We need to include in our ethic other people, the whole global population. We need to include in our ethic also the entire environment, the planetary environment. We need a new identity. Who are we? We have each a personal identity. I have my name, my family. You have yours. But we also are Hungarians or Italians. We're also Europeans. We're also human beings, planetary citizens now. We need to see ourselves in relation to the others. We have to join our ethnic and national identity with a global identity. Not against one or against the other, but combining, incorporating others. We have become an interconnected planetary species. We cannot continue to act like we would be separate tribal groups, whether we call them nations or ethnic groups or continents. This is perhaps the most basic issue, but I don't have time now to come in on this in detail. I had the pleasure 2 days ago, I was giving a talk at Yale University precisely on the new concept of consciousness. Let me tell you, their interest in the idea of consciousness is growing rapidly. There are whole new journals being online, much more discussion on it. Because ultimately, as Max Planck, the great physicist, says, you cannot get beyond consciousness. Everything you know, everything you see is consciousness. So the question is, how do we construe our consciousness? How do we construct our image of ourselves and the world on the basis of our consciousness? And here I have a few things to say. We know that a human being is an organism, a living organism, and we know that living organisms are in a very curious state, in a curious condition, which is known a condition far from equilibrium. What kind of equilibrium? Thermal equilibrium and chemical equilibrium. This is what thermodynamics deals with this. Most other things, without getting into details, most other things, artificial things in the world, if you don't feed them energy, they run down. A living system doesn't run down. As long as it's alive, it maintains itself far from equilibrium. That means that it uses that mill that I started with, that energy mill from the sun, uses constantly to maintain itself. To maintain itself, you have to bring in, you have to drink, you have to eat, you have to have a viable environment, you have to have a viable surroundings around us, a social environment, cultural environment as well. And we have to remain an integral human being, an integral species. What do we need for this? Here it's very clear. Such a system is, as Ilya Prigozhin, the Nobel laureate in chemistry, who was a good friend of mine until he died, he said, we are a dissipative system. Such a system takes in energy, uses it, and puts it out, the used up energy, constantly replacing used energy with fresh energy. Okay. We need to be able to do that. What do we need to do that? We need to be, to use a single word, coherent. What does coherence mean in this context? This is very important. I think these are basic concepts. What does coherence mean? Coherence means that every part of the system is finely tuned to every other part. The physics definition of coherence is that the wave trains that are emitted by a vibrating system, and all systems vibrate, all oscillate, are in phase. When different wave trains join together in phase, then they transfer information, they can act together. They do not become uniform, but they have information on the basis of which they can act. In other words, we have to become coherent, we have to be in phase, as it were, with other people and with the environment. The diagnosis is very clear from here. We have lost this ability to be in phase with other people, with other cultures, and with the natural environment. Tribes did not lose it. Tribes were fully coherent within the tribe. Of course, they made wars occasionally with other tribes, but within the ecosystem, they were coherent. There is no living species that would be incoherent in that sense, because as soon as it would begin to be incoherent, natural selection would act. They couldn't reproduce itself sufficiently, and sooner or later they become extinct. Only human species can be incoherent in the sense of cutting itself off from the rest of humanity, from the environment, and then using technologies to remedial, to try to maintain itself. Nonetheless, degenerating the environment, trying to save some of it, creating artificial food sources, artificial energies, etc., so as to maintain, despite of the decoherence of the human species has entered into. When did this enter into? Perhaps 30,000 years ago, when the very first human civilization became conscious and became separate, seemed to be separate from the rest of the world. No other species thinks or acts as though it thought that it was separate from the rest of the world. We have started doing this. And it became a critical point in the 20th century when we have begun to look at ourselves, small groups on this earth, as being responsible only for themselves and not for what happens around them, not what happens to other people. So the decoherence. When a living organism has a group of cells that is no longer coherent with the rest, what do we call it? It's a disease. It's a disease because that group of cells no longer can function properly. And when that group of cells replicates itself without regard to what happens to the rest, then it's a fatal disease. Then it's cancer. We have something very similar on Earth. The human species replicates itself without much regard for what it does to the other species and to the environment. Some groups within the human societies replicate themselves in the sense that try to look their own interests, try to make money, wealth, and power in order to maintain themselves without regard to what it does to the rest. So the whole system, this total system, has become very largely incoherent. There are factors of decoherence. This needs to be corrected. We have to reconnect with the world. Now, of course, you say, of course we are connected. We have the internet. We have television. We have all these things. But don't forget, connectivity is not the same as communication. We are connected, but how do we use our connections? Do we use it to communicate? Do we use it to re-establish our relations to one another? Very largely we don't. We are still very self-centered, locally self-centered. Another interesting term that's coming to very much to the fore today is local versus non-local. We used to think local versus global, but now you can say no, local versus non-local. Non-local means global plus, because it means whatever happens to one organism in one place, one system, also happens to the others. There's an instant, immediate effect. We didn't believe that such an effect would be possible until the 1970s, when the so-called Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen experiment showed that what happens to one part of a particle also happens to the other one. When we split a particle, you measure one part, and you measure the other part, and you see that the other part, which could be miles and miles, hundreds of miles away, behaves as though it would be measured itself. In other words, it's there. The effect is not local. And what is coming to the fore increasingly, that is kind of non-locality, which is called entanglement, is not limited to the physical, to the mind, to the super small world scale. It's all living systems, appear to be in essential respects non-local. The working of the brain, the many phenomena of consciousness, many living phenomena. Now increasingly the latest discoveries show what happens to one happens to the other one. The latest result to come out, as far as I knew the latest, is to show that DNA has a recognition over distance. One strand of DNA recognizes another in another organism which could be far away. It's a non-local effect. It's an entanglement effect. And we are an entangled species. We are non-local consciousnesses. We are non-local individuals. We cannot behave as though we would be strictly limited here and now without regard to the others. All species are, of course, non-local in this sense, but they act as non-local, whereas we artificially think we are separate. This whole new concept that is coming to the fore increasingly, talking about oneness, talking about wholeness, is a very positive sign. It's a last-minute sign, I think, that we are waking up to the fact of who we really are, not just here and now. We are part of this entire planetary system. Progress, development, sustainable development, destructive development. It's not a linear process. We used to think that change is linear, step by step. You do a little bit more at one point in the input, you get a little different on the output. It turns out that you have critical bifurcation points in which change, the tempo of change, as all of a sudden differs. It either goes up or goes down. A species reaches a point where it either becomes extinct or changes, it mutates and becomes possibly a member of a new ecosystem, could even become a dominant species. What happens to the old species? Darwin used to told us that they change little by little. However, it turns out that change is not stepwise. When the critical point is reached, the dominant species, this comes from population biology, doesn't change by little, it becomes extinct. The dominant species moves out, and from the periphery, mutant species come in. This is very relevant because we have lots of mutations happening in society today. They are in the civil sphere, largely. They are very largely occurring through the internet, occurring through the youth cultures, through alternative cultures. A lot of events are taking place, discussing how we need to recover our oneness. I had the great pleasure and privilege a few weeks ago to launch what we call the Fuji Declaration, the divine spark and the heart of humanity, the recognition of our oneness. It is now going on the internet. This is just one example of how, when you launch a stone, put a stone into this liquid, into this boiling cauldron, how it has consequences, how it can continue to develop, to expand, and to diffuse in the world. These are the positive signs. We are recognizing our separateness as an error, as a mistake of the last century, a misinterpretation of Newton's ideas. Now we are replacing them with the quantum, with relativity, with the idea of a whole entangled, systemic whole world. So up or down, in a bifurcation point, you can do many things. You cannot do two things. You cannot stay as you were, and you cannot go back to the past. The past can no longer work because the environment will have changed in the meanwhile. Conditions will have changed. You have to find a new way forward. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, at a bifurcation point, also known as a tipping point or a chaos point. The possibilities are before us. We are not locked into that linear future of degeneration, of crisis and catastrophe. We have this unique chance now to move forward. We have to move from the red line of degeneration to the blue line, to the blue scenario of a new stability, a new equilibrium, which is not a dead equilibrium, which is a dynamic equilibrium, re-establishing our presence on this spaceship Earth as a conscious species, recovering our oneness with the rest. This is the last thing I want to show you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention up till now. There have been civilizational changes before. And we are in the midst of a civilizational change. But in the past, these big changes occurred very slowly. First, initially, hundreds of thousands of years, then thousands of years, then hundreds of years. But they concerned very largely limited groups of people. Societies here, certain types of societies, Western societies, animistic societies, traditional societies. And they created increasing coherence within those groups. They re-established a kind of equilibrium. They did not embrace all of it, all of humanity. Now, the next civilizational change has to move from the limited civilizational group and in-group to the entire human family. Because we are so interdependent, we are so interactive, that it's not enough to change here and there. Our change must penetrate everywhere. So we need to use the means available to us. Part of this means is what we are doing today. Talk about these issues and reflect on them. Ask ourselves what we can do about them. Because when we change, the world starts to change. It's not a question of making others change. It's a question of taking the first step, being the change. And I think this is the process that is with us. The next generation must move from logos to holos. By logos, I mean a logical mean of thinking, but a localized way of thinking, a Newtonian way of thinking, whereby you say, I am here at this point in space and this point in time, and I take care of myself. The logos, the holos rather, is the non-local, is the entangled. is the one that says, I am here, yes, but I'm not only here. I'm also there. I'm also part of you, and you are part of me. This kind of thinking may seem poetic. Of course, it's a rediscovery of some ancient insights. But now, with the new developments in the natural sciences, we see that this kind of thinking has a basis in reality. And in any case, what we know for sure, we need it. Because if we persist on thinking on our separateness, on individual independence of other things, of nature, of other groups, then we'll move ourselves into an increasingly difficult crisis situation. If we wake up and become that, what ancient traditional civilizations have told us that we are, but they have been local civilizations, now do it on a global level. If we do that, there is still time. I'm convinced that there is still time, but the time is very short. So it's very good to have meetings like this, discussions like this. I took the liberty of calling together some of the most eminent thought leaders to discuss the steps that are before us, what we need to do. The opportunity is here, the time is short. Let's act. Thank you for your attention.
First of all, thank you to Professor László for this marvelous relation. My name is Erika Poli. I am a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and an integrative expert in integrative medicine. And what do you think could be the future of medicine according to this perspective?
The recognition that we are a whole organism is extremely important, because what we call holistic medicine, which is psychosomatic as well, psychospiritual, and is a new step, which is an old step rediscovered. It's also the recognition that we can use nature as a source, not only a source of nourishment, a source of information, to be able to use natural substances to change the information flow in our body, or to maintain the better information. So ultimately, I think medicine will change from the manipulative one where you take the knife and cut it out, or use synthetic substances, change to the point where you're using natural methods, going back to how the ancients used medicine to keep a patient alive, not only just to fix when something went wrong locally, but to keep it alive, keep the person alive, a person as part of its environment. So holistic information medicine that we have been working on with the Club of Budapest as well. You have find here a book also written on that, information medicine. That, I think, is the next step. And there are new medications, new treatments are coming forward, which rediscover some of the old things, but also add new things, which show that yes, we are an integral organism that has become partially decoherent, where we can re-establish our coherence. And medicine has that task of re-establishing us as being part of our environment, a positive, constructive part. So thank you for